Salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to 3 Peas in a Pod, episode 232.
We made it.
We did. We're here in the midst of all the chaos and turmoil in our world.
Oh,
Which,
wow.
truth is, I could say that at any point in time on this podcast, and it would be true. But as we're taping, it is especially true.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out when you said. I thought. See, I'm more lost now that you said the final. So when you said it the first time, I thought Jason's referencing something specific. Then you said the second part, and I thought, oh, he's just making like a little wise statement about how our world's always. And then you said the final
And then
thing.
you said the third thing.
And I'm going, now I'm thinking, which
was a
thing
circle.
is he talking about? Because I can
It
think of a
was a
couple
circle.
things.
The answer is yes.
Okay,
I'm
there
doing
you
all
go.
of that.
It's all of them.
It's all of that.
It's all the stuff.
But
Things
we don't
are certainly in the news
Oh,
as they
yeah.
tend to be
Aren't they always?
with 24-hour news cycles.
Exactly.
Yes.
So by the time this comes out, it's probably something else.
I would think so.
Another Braves player has gotten hurt and ruined my life.
That happens every day.
Apparently.
Somebody
every
got
day.
hurt. I'm guessing someone got hurt.
Lots of people all year long.
Everybody's hurt, man.
All year long, the Braves have struggled to keep anybody healthy.
Yes, we're cursed this year.
The only people we can get healthy are people no one wants playing.
That's
No.
right. Or suck this year.
Yeah,
You know?
that's right.
But some
The
of
MLB has not like increased its season or something. has
Oh
it?
no.
Oh no.
No, no.
Mm-mm.
No.
It's still too long.
Yeah, it is really
It's
long.
really long.
It's really
not
long.
Well, that's what
complaining.
all NBA fans say. Is that's why everyone's injured is because they increased they only increased the NBA by like 4
Nope.
games or something like that.
No. The reason everybody's hurting the MLB is because they're doing things to their body that they should not be
They
doing.
probably are. Yeah, that's probably true.
We could get into that.
That's
but
probably all professional athletes.
probably.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Mhm. Yeah. At some point.
Welcome to your Atlanta Braves podcast.
Yeah.
We could do one, Ed.
Yeah.
Me and you. And Nathan could like make fun of us.
That's
I was gonna
right.
say, I have nothing to contribute, but I'd be happy to.
He would certainly contribute
That's right.
because he's always got something to say.
I do
That's-
have something to say. I don't
That's
know,
the
I don't know
biggest
that it would-
chaos in my world. All that stuff politically going on,
Whatever.
it's going to continually go on.
Oh yeah. So the question is, do you have something to say about today's question?
I bet I can find something.
Which, by the way, we need questions. So if you have not submitted a question that is burning a hole through your brain,
I'd like to say
Please send
we
it.
don't need.
No, we don't need questions.
in terms
We
of,
would really like
If you would like to continue to hear us ramble
that's right.
about things that aren't
That's
the
right.
Atlanta Braves,
In terms of this podcast existence, we do need questions.
like the person who sent in to our question form one time when we were on a hiatus,
Mhm.
they said 2 weeks without a podcast. This is making me sad. Did not give us a question.
that's right.
They just told us to
You're
make
not
us
sad enough
Not
to
enough.
give us a question.
So if it makes you sad, send
Yeah.
us a question.
Link is in the description or show notes. There you go. Today's question, though, is a question about, well, there's a parenting issue in here, and there's a marriage issue in here.
Oh,
So,
all in one question.
all in one question, but a very succinct question. So
Well,
I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Those two are often tied together.
Well, that's really
That's what this question's
the
about.
question.
That's the question.
Uh-huh.
You're prophetic. You ready for the
I'm
question?
just told.
You ready for the question? You are old. Should couples who have a child together get married just for the sake of raising them? Should couples who have a child together get married just for the sake of raising them? Go.
So this is assuming an unmarried couple by the nature of,
Yes.
I think the question,
Yes.
unmarried couple. We've
Has
had a
child.
kid
We've had a kid.
before we got married. Now we're trying to.
There's
and maybe
there's a bunch of questions before the questions that I just have to let go of.
Okay, go.
No, I'm
No,
just
he's
gonna
letting go of
I'm
them.
just gonna let you do not.
Oh, I
want me
thought
to-
you meant you were going to ask.
No, I'm just gonna let them go.
Okay.
So we're assuming in this situation, unmarried couple
Mhm.
has had a child.
Mhm.
And what I'm assuming from the question is marriage was not even on the horizon, but now because of the child, because I would assume if you were like, we're engaged to be married
Yeah.
and we've had a child, should we go through with the marriage? That doesn't sound like that's the question.
Mm-mm, it
The
sounds
question
like-
is,
Mhm.
we weren't even thinking that direction,
Yes.
but now we have a child. Should we begin thinking that?
Should having the child then prompt marriage?
Right. Who wants to tackle it first?
Well, there's
I have
a lot of.
I would
Oh.
say should is not a good is not the
I would
correct.
too.
I'm comfortable saying that.
I will say this, based on the way the question is worded, I thought that last phrase signaled to me when you say in that question, just for the sake of raising the child, by saying that, to me, that leads me towards, well, no.
on marriage.
on the
Yes.
marriage question, because if you take those two together, in my experience as a marriage counselor, anyway, if you get married for that reason, just to raise a child together, that's probably not the wisest reason to get married.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that people who do that don't
Right.
wind up building a healthy marriage. You can, but I think you have to eventually get past, because it all comes down to what is marriage, doesn't it?
Well,
What's it for anyway? Is it just to raise kids? And if
not to be contrary.
Okay.
Not to be contrary,
Go-
though that
okay.
is
But
quite my nature.
we're trying to get a whole nuanced picture.
Mhm.
If you remove what most, I guarantee you, everybody who watches this thinks of when they think of marriage, then the question of, I have a reason to be married. That's in the question. I think I have a reason to be married.
Mhm.
The question came about because they think they have a reason.
Mhm.
The child being the reason.
Yeah, for the history of mankind, a reason that you had to be married was a good enough reason to be married.
Sure.
Mhm.
That didn't have anything to do with we are sexually compatible,
Mhm.
we are attracted to each other, we like each other, we know each other.
Wow.
Those
Yeah.
things were not considered. They just weren't considered.
Mhm.
And for the history of most of mankind, a reason was often, they told me we're getting married.
That is true.
And those marriages, by and large, and still in lots of parts of the world where that is still the reason, that's enough. And they
Yes.
often work.
They do.
So here's what I would say. If you think a reason is you think it would be healthier for a child to be married, to be raised by two parents who love the child, you could build a loving relationship with each other for the sake of the child.
Yeah.
If that's a good enough, if that's the reason, you could, and I can make a pretty good sociological case and psychological case that children that are raised by two parents who love the child and care for each other, aren't ugly to each other, don't hurt each other, the child often is better off.
So I think.
So I'm not saying one way or the other, because there are a lot of precursors to this particular situation. You ask three Christians to give you an answer about a situation that has already gone way beyond where God. So God has a river over here where everything flows. This question starts over here.
Sure.
So I think this is where I was, and so I agree with both presuppositions here, which I think is what I heard Ed say is there's a presupposition that maybe the idea of chemistry and affection is not the only reason to get married, which I think for most
I agree
modern
as well.
people, that's their thought of marriage.
That's right.
Which would be for most modern people would be their reason to say, well, a kid's not enough of a reason.
Because if chemistry and affection are the reason, chemistry and affection become the reason to quit.
Oh,
Sure.
yes.
So
That's right.
there's that side. I've heard what Jason is saying is in your experience with people in counseling,
Mm-hmm.
and just I would assume outside of even professional counseling, but even pastoral counseling,
Mm-hmm.
there are people who go, well, this is just what we should do, so we're going to get married. We're not even really
Or even-
committed to the idea of marriage, but it's like this kind of has to happen for the sake of the kid, and that will somehow do something.
Yeah.
Because I will say, there's also evidence to say that you staying married for the 18 years the kid is in your house and then you immediately get divorced does
It does a damage as well.
Yes,
so
it does.
so
I did not mean just for
I know you didn't, but I'm trying to bring,
I'm talking about building a marriage for the sake of the kid, which is what, if you want to build a marriage, and that lasts until the kid's dead.
yeah. So I think that's what I'm trying to bring both things in so that you hear what's
Yes.
existing in the tension in the
Mhm.
middle.
That's right.
And this is where I said at the beginning, I don't think should is the right question because, and Ed pointed at this, you're already sitting, if you are a believer, and that's why you're already sitting outside the realm of should at this point. And what I mean is in the ideal. That there is God's ideal, which is the way it would go, is that a man and a woman would be married before they have sex. That is the way and then they would be lovingly committed. Sex would only exist within the context of that marriage between that man and that woman. That sex would produce a child that then would be raised within the context of that loving union, right? So that's the ideal. And I don't remember who I heard say this. I want to say it's Andy Stanley, but he may not be the right person to say this. But when you're sitting in the world, you always have to do both of, I live in the real world.
Right.
That's right.
But I
That's
still
right.
keep my eyes on God's ideal.
That's
I don't
right.
drop either one.
That's right.
I'm able to both live in, okay, we're already outside of what God's ideal would be, right? But living in the land of, so now I got to jump up to God's ideal immediately may not be helpful. And this is where I would, in my mind, am trying to help us bridge the ideas here, which is, it really depends on who the other person is in this relationship. You may have the desire to do what Ed said. I want to jump up to God's ideal. I know we didn't start this the way it should be, and we very much believe this. God can resurrect anything. God can transform anything. If both of you are like, hey, we are committed to one another and we're committed to this kid because we're committed to God, right? God can make that happen, and you can make enough progress to move up to the ideal.
That's right.
But whether you're the man or the woman in the situation, coming to the other person who's saying, marriage ain't on my horizon, I don't think this is anything I want, and saying, hey, and now I'm trying to like compromise and make a deal with you. Well, if we get married, we'll work this and we'll do this. I think that, and I'll say this, take kid out of the equation. If that's your approach to marriage as a single person in general, which is, I just got to find a body.
Right.
I just got to find somebody, and we're not at least desiring the same thing, which is union with one another, with God at the center of it. And that's the beginning. You're never going to get to God's ideal. And so when I hear the question and I hear, should all people who have kids together get married for the sake of the kid, I would say should's not the right question.
Right.
I think the right question is go back to the real for a moment and say, with this real person that I've had a kid with, are we both desiring this? Because it is going to be hard work. You have instantly made, and I think secular or Christian, anyone who is helping you, counselor or whatever, would say this situation is now more complicated than a normal, I don't know what the right relationship, I don't know what the union would be, because there's a third person involved in the situation.
That's right.
Every time if we just take marriage, sex, babies, all of that off the table, again, I'm assuming the person asked us, and maybe they asked every other podcaster on the thing for all I know, but they asked us hoping we'd give them the Christian viewpoint. It doesn't matter whether we could take money and say, when you step outside of God's plan for money, it makes things more complicated. It doesn't make it impossible. You can always get back to where you should be, but every step away from what God has said is the way to do it complicates things immensely. And deciding over here that I want to get here and asking God to help you, He will help you, but the complication is still there.
Yeah.
You got to work all the way through the complication. And yes, it would be very complicated now that you already have a child to decide, I want to get married. It will also be very complicated to decide, I have a child with this person and we're not going to be married.
Oh, yes.
That also will be exceptionally complicated. The complication is built in.
Yeah.
This situation has immense complication built in.
And that's what I think I alluded to it. For me, it comes back to the question of, well, what's marriage intended to be?
Yes.
In God's viewpoint, what is marriage supposed to be? And and we get hints of this in the scripture. I'm
Mhm.
not sure we get a direct 100, black and white answer,
Sure.
but I think we get hints in the scripture that it is meant to be, as we've been saying around here, to use that language, a faithful witness
That's right.
right.
to King Jesus, to the gospel and those things. And so I think for two people who look at it that way and say, well, we would like to do that.
Right.
We would
Yes.
like our union
Yes.
to become a faithful witness, and both parties say that too, and then that's the commitment. Because here's the deal: that's what every couple, you would hope, Christian couple coming together in marriage would say to one another. It's a covenant I enter into.
That's
It's
right.
a choice that I make.
That's
That's right.
right.
So I make this choice so that we can come together and witness to King Jesus in this way, and we're going to build our marriage on that foundation. Well, if that's where you start, then go. Absolutely, I think that's wise. And I
do
think
too.
that's God
Yes.
honored. God, and like you said, Ed, God will help you if you go. But to come at it and go, well, all right, we'll do it for the kid.
Right.
I think you're starting from a very shaky foundation already. Doesn't mean you can't eventually get there.
Right.
But again, it adds complication.
All right. So I like
Right.
I like the angle you went at there, and I want to just double down a little on that,
Okay.
which is to say, should I get married for the sake of the kid? And maybe this is where in my head just
Yeah.
I was thinking on just what do you mean by should?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is the difficult part. I think I would say the same thing. And I had people, so my wife and I, we started dating when we were 15, got married when we were 19. And I've had a lot of people ask me, like, well, when did you know you should get married? And I said, there was no should behind it. I
Yeah.
said, it seemed right to us.
Yeah.
And they go, well, how did you know, like, you just loved her so much she was the one? I said, well, I don't know. We'd just been together and it felt weird. Like, I had no reason to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always assumed that part of my life would be this part, and I did grow up in a Christian context. So in my mind, this is part of it. I get married somehow when I'm with somebody for the sake of saying, I want to honor Jesus in this relationship. So to say the reason you should get married is because you just really, really like someone and love them, right? Or, and often this happens in Christian context, I just really want to have sex and I was told I couldn't outside, right?
Mhm.
Or we have a kid together. Anything that's not, I want to live out the gospel of I want to lay down my life for my spouse like Christ laid down his life for the church, which is what Paul says it is,
That's right.
right? Where we submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, right? That is the basis of Christian marriage. Now, here's the part, and this goes back to the thing we said at the beginning. I think almost everyone has to admit that's not the reason almost any of us got married.
Nobody
Right.
starts there.
Yes.
So this is where I was trying to get to is
I shouldn't say nobody.
no, not
I
nobody.
didn't start there.
I did not start
Well,
that.
and even if you start there and you believe you're starting there, what that means and what that looks like, you grow in that.
Changes.
That's right.
You have to.
Absolutely.
You
But
have to.
But my point is the should of the basis of our marriage is going to be a kid,
Mhm.
or the basis of our marriage is going to be our love for one another.
Mhm.
Neither one of those, I think. And I think in our modern world, my love for, and she just means so much to me. She's my one, she's my soulmate, whatever. He completes me.
Yeah.
That, most people say that's a solid basis. I was at a wedding recently where someone said, love is easy, like is hard. Liking, and it was a non-believer who said that like this chemistry, this affection for one another, you have to work at that and it's hard. And that was elevated. Everyone was like, that's amazing. Because that's the basis of a marriage, is really being best friends and liking one another.
Maybe you should redefine what love means.
I agree. I agree. But that was
Yeah.
a very modern context.
Yeah, I know.
What
You got to say something.
someone's got to get up and do something.
I mean, they asked you to stand up. Words are going to come out.
That's right.
I think if you're already living in this real,
Mm-hmm.
which is I'm off from where Jesus would have me start this relationship.
Mhm.
You got to set your sights on the ideal a little
Mm-hmm.
and say, am I ready with this person to lay down my life like Jesus laid down his life for them?
Mm-hmm.
I get that's not where every marriage starts, but hopefully any Christian marriage is discipled into that at some point.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you that would be your thought process behind this. Beyond, is it what's best for the kid? As Ed has already said, there's a lot of sociological and psychological research to say that is the healthiest environment. But there's also assumptions that go into that too, which is, where did those relationships start and all of those? There's other contextual factors that go into those things as well. So I think you're at a place where you have to look at this other person and you are trusting that they mean it to you as well, which is, I'm willing to lay down my life for you. And I want to do this for the sake of Jesus. And as you hear, because we're all having this conversation here, and part of our complication in having this is we don't know who you are. And it would be a little easier if we could have you as a person, this idea that I can fully make decisions based on the ideal. I think God did not just give us an ideal. We live in a real world that is broken by sin and complication. We are supposed to hold the two and say, I'm trying to move towards God's ideal for my life. But the practical steps of that have to be where I am right now in comparison to where He is. And so that would be my encouragement to you is, to look at those ideals of Christian marriage of, I want to lay down my life for this person.
Yeah. Because I think what I was getting at, I'm still working out the thought in my head, how I wanted to say it. But I think what I was trying to get at is, and you talked about the foundation of your marriage is, I'm just going to raise this kid. And that's how I read that question. My fear for a couple like that is, if you don't continue to keep your eyes on the ideal, you don't grow into that and get discipled into that, what will happen is, what I have seen in the marriage counseling world is, there are so many couples that walk into my office post raising children, and they are struggling in their relationship with one another because they never got farther than that. Or maybe they started at, I love this person, you're my soulmate. Kid came along and it was like, oh, we're here to raise this kid. And they lost sight of some of that for a while. And basically what happened is they just shifted their reason for being married.
Well, yeah.
And now it's all about raising this kid. And my point is, if that's it, and you don't tend to that foundational thing that we're talking, the ideal that we're talking about, you're going to have to eventually address that, because part of, being that family is your kids hopefully grow up and leave at one point in that process, and that role that you've based that marriage on changes and shifts or goes away in some parts, in some ways. And so now, you see what I'm saying? The foundational reason why we're together is not solid. And so every time it moves, we get shaky. Yeah. And so that's what I wind up dealing with in marriage counseling, is couples who are looking at each other and to your point, I don't like you anymore. Not only do I not like you, I don't think I can love you in the way
because I don't like you.
Because I don't like you. And so now we've got to start almost from square one and go, okay, now what is our foundation? And do we even want to build a foundation that will support a relationship of marriage between us?
Well, and I think the word support there is huge, because what has happened in our modern world is we have decided, maybe marriage, I think people do this in parenting too. I need a vessel to contain all the longing in my soul, all the desire within me, my need for affection, my need to be loved and desired and wanted. Marriage is not a big enough vehicle to contain all of that. Neither is your 4-year-old will be crushed by putting all of that on them.
And if you raise a healthy 18-year-old, they will crush you.
Yes.
Because they will not love you as much as you love them.
That's right.
If they're healthy, they will walk away from you and find somebody they love more.
Yeah.
And that's what you hopefully want for them. I personally think the problem with what you described, I think you're absolutely right. I've seen the same people. The basis of the marriage often is, without knowing, because it's the water we swim in when it comes to relationships in our culture, at least for the last 70 years, I'm 65, has been, every relationship is about me and my needs.
Yes.
And so I get married because this person makes me feel a certain way, or I feel a certain thing toward them. And so we get married. And then way too often this happens. I used to think it happened more with moms. I think it happens with moms and dads equally. I now have a kid, and this kid supplants the person that I was married to. As I've openly heard moms and dads both say, nobody comes in front of my child.
Yes.
No one. And the spouse knows.
And they would even openly say, my spouse does not, my kid comes first.
I'll say this. I said that one time in a message, and someone confronted me about it.
Oh, yeah.
That you said the reverse.
So
I said the reverse.
You said my wife comes
I
before
said
my kids.
me and my wife
Yes.
were first, and then I'm supported. And they said, wow, you know, they questioned my fitness as a parent.
So here,
Yeah.
now I get this. And if I hopefully do a good job, if I really do love this kid, I have to help them become a healthy adult that has boundaries with me.
Yes.
They have to have boundaries with me, or they become too codependent on me.
Yes.
And if I raise one, then they're going to leave. And now I've spent a long time offending this spouse by telling them, if I had more than one kid, you're not even number 2.
That's right.
If I had 3, you might be 4.
Yeah.
And so no wonder we don't like each other. I've told you for 20 years that you weren't close to, I mean, you're in the top 5. I guess if you like that, you're in the top 5, but you're not number 1. No wonder. But the problem was the same. My motivation was what fed me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think,
I didn't go into either of these relationships.
Marriage or parenting.
Marriage or
Yes.
parenting. The thing was what makes me have the buzz. And that's where I was going into. If two people really, and I know this is a long shot, would say, for the sake of this kid, we will do what's best. Well, best means I'm going to have to love you more than I love the kid, because the kid can't swim in waters where they're the most important person in the family.
yes.
It hurts them.
Yes.
It's too much responsibility.
It's too much responsibility. Now, can somebody genuinely do that who has already started the thing way over here? They could. The two of them could, with God's help, get back on track. It's just uber complicated. But not doing it is also uber complicated.
Well, and maybe this is
We don't have an answer for you that it's going to be easy.
Choose your hard. That's what
Yeah,
we're
that's
saying.
right.
Which, by the way, that's a whole separate thing. But I just want to say this off the top. All of life, and I've told this now that I've been leading leaders, I said everything in leadership, but I'd say parenting is this way. I'd say life is this way. You're choosing your heart.
That's
Every
right.
decision has a yes. Everything you say yes to, you say no to something else.
Not just one. You're saying no to everything.
Everything else, right?
One yes is no to everything else.
And whatever you're saying yes to is going to be difficult, is going to be complicated, is going to be hard, which is why you get to a point where you have to say, I have my sights on something bigger than the yes. I'm saying yes to ultimately God. I'm saying yes to what He would call me to do, because He is the only vessel that is big enough to contain all human longing and desire. Rightly ordered, then, I put my children and my wife, or your husband, in that context, right? And I'm able to actually love them properly through my loving God, because He's the only one. So then when I go and I say, my kid's not, I'm sorry, I just punched you in the head.
It's okay.
My kids aren't fulfilling my desires. I said this to a parent recently. I said, well, what do I do when my child's really disappointed me? I said, the first thing you do is, if it's not like a sin issue that you're correcting, so the first thing you do is you never tell them. I said, if they are making a healthy decision, you find someone else that you come tell me. You come to me, another parent, and say, you know what, I'm really disappointed.
Yeah.
I was hoping they would turn out like this. Or even your spouse being willing to say, I thought our marriage was going to look different than it is. It's not their job to hold all of your disappointments and all the things you held
It's
on
different if, Jason and I have been friends a long time. And if Jason at some point told me he was going to do something and he doesn't do it,
Sure.
then it's reasonable for him to say, hey, man, I'm really disappointed.
That's
You
right.
didn't do what you told me.
Yes.
But for me, after a long time of being friends, he hasn't said anything and I just expect something
right.
and I get
All
disappointed.
expectations.
Well, I'm just saying that ain't on him.
That's right.
That ain't on you.
Expectations have to be stated and agreed upon. The other thing I was going to say is if there are people listening, which, I mean, maybe so, and you're not married, and we keep talking about this idea of God's ideal, and I think unfortunately in the American church, maybe all over, maybe, I don't know, I've never been anywhere else, that to be not long enough to be able to know what anyone else is teaching. We have basically, God's ideal has been boiled down to, as long as it's a heterosexual couple who wants to get married, we're good with that. Yeah. And that's because ultimately we've just decided we're going to negate that mostly what marriage is about negating other things. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to understand when we say, well, then what would the foundation be? You know, the reason that for Christians, the reason marriage has persisted even to a point where, you know, it's not like we need to grow the population it's not this is necessarily the problem we're trying to solve. It's because ultimately what God is trying to do is to build a community of people. He's trying to gather a people, not just individual people, a people who could live together with him at the center. And a central part of that is when, you know, like in a church like ours, those are broken down into smaller units that are called families. And the reason you would want a Christian marriage is you would want two people who are trying to have interactive life with God on their own now can find out how to do that in this kind of microcosm, right? This, as you said, a witness, an example together. We are going to die to ourselves, right? And live together in such a way that we put Jesus at the center. Then you would say, not because we just need to grow this family, or because, you know what, I'd like to have little kids running around who look like me.
Yeah.
To have this idea of saying, we then want to disciple other people in a context that, as Ed's already said, is healthy. We have these children, right? And maybe we even adopt children, right? If we can't biologically have children, we bring children in to say, I want you to experience life in the kingdom through me, through this experience of two people at the head of the family who are dying to one another. And then they extend that to you with the hope that you get brought in. So if you're a single person, I know a lot of single people go, I don't know why I'd ever get married. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I'd ever have kids. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I know married people, right? They used to call them dinks, dual income, no kids, right? We're both working, we're married people, right? And that's where I don't even know why I'd have kids. There is a Christian answer to that question. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying, once again, I don't know that it's a ultimate should that you know, because people I know have been beaten down with that.
Yes.
But there is an answer to the question, which is why it's because there is something about living out the ideal of God in a real world, in my body, in my relationship.
Jason talked about this a little bit. This is a whole other thing, and I don't want to, we just don't need to go into it on this question. There is a visible picture of God's love for humanity that he intends between a man and a woman who are married to each other.
Yeah.
And in the very earliest verses of the Bible, when he says he created them male and female, he created them in our image. Mm-hmm. It's not the male that was made in his image and then the woman was made in the male's image.
Right.
They together represent the image of God. And Paul says there is something about that we miss out on in that covenant relationship that Father, Son, and Spirit have with each other that also exists in a marriage. And, I just don't think it's wrong that the church for hundreds and thousands of years now have called marriage a sacrament. It means where we
take something ordinary.
Yeah, and it gets the divine gets attached to it. Mm-hmm. Nothing has grown me in 45 years like my marriage. Nothing.
Yeah,
I'd agree.
Yeah, and I would say too, because again, we don't know who asked the question. We don't know what context you're coming from.
No.
If you are already married for the sake of your kids and you're having difficulties and questions, the same thing, I would say the same thing to you. Go back to the foundation and find out, are we really desiring to build a marriage on these ideal foundations of God and his kingdom that we just talked about? And let that be your starting point. Get some help and decide is that where we're both headed?
Well,
And are we intending to go there?
And you probably should talk to somebody
Yes,
personally.
that's what I mean by get help.
Being pastored by three guys from afar in a video,
Yeah.
and thinking that you can take one little 30-minute conversation and take a little bit of God's will and apply it, and it just go.
Mhm.
It's somebody needs to know you,
Yes.
and I mean, if you want to call and talk to one of us
Yeah.
so that we can get a fully fleshed version, and you can talk back and forth. We'd love to do that, but
Yeah.
This is complicated. However, you're going to go at
Yes, it is. And that's why I say you need help to walk this path in community with God's
Yes.
people so that you can come to the place where you are building your life on the foundation, whether it includes marriage or not,
it. Right.
Yeah.
because you can do that. So, all right, enough of that. We've gone a little bit over our normal time.
Yeah,
So we did have a lot to say about that.
we
one.
did.
So happy about that. Continue to send in those questions, links in the description, and we will see you next week.